Hey everyone!
Friends, it's time for what we read.
That's right, the longest season so far.
I know, I feel like we're gonna be past the 30 episode mark.
That's
maybe,
true.
possibly?
Well, then again, we've limited ourselves to like just so few books per episode, so that's
Even
probably why it's longer.
Like they still end up pretty long.
That's true. I didn't used to
I hope
average.
you guys enjoy.
That's true. Yeah.
So today, in what Alexa has been reading lately, this video is going to be entirely all historical fiction or historical romance.
Awesome.
I went through a very deep historical romance binge. And I'm not even mad about it because it was very, very fun and exactly what my brain needed at a time when everything was a little bit like too much for me in real life. So I'm going to start with the YA, the only YA and the only historical fiction. It's going to be The Downstairs Girl by Stacey Lee, which I have meant to read since it came out last year. My friend Hannah from So Obsessed With actually chose this for me to read in January and I only read it in March, so oops. But at least I read it.
That's right.
Anyway, this is the story of a Chinese-American girl named Jo, and she is struggling to find a way to make ends meet. In this novel, Jo is very much defined by both her race and her gender, and she is trying to find ways to overcome both, considering all the circumstances that life affords her. And one of the ways she does this subversively is to anonymously be the writer of this advice column for a newspaper where she addresses people's questions and queries as Miss Sweetie. And not only does she get involved with that, she also finds herself involved in the suffragette movement. She finds herself also testing the boundaries of her own life in it. It's a very ambitious YA novel, I'll say that. Like, there are a lot of things that Stacey Lee tackles in this story, like you can probably already tell from what I was trying to say about it. And in that regard, I think it's very important because it provides a perspective for something that you don't normally see in YA fiction, particularly because Asians in American history are starting to become a thing that I see more often in like popular YA fiction, but it's so rare to find. And it's always fascinating to see someone like open or shed a light on that particular kind of, you know, time period and how Asian Americans would have been viewed or lived through it. Right. And Stacey Lee has always been really good at that. I actually have to say that this is probably my least favorite of all the novels she's written because I feel like the story was taking on a little too much and ended up not entirely doing justice to all of it. Like, the advice column plotline didn't quite pan out in the way that I thought it would, or felt like it kind of ended up underdeveloped instead of being a bigger part of the story. And I think there were a lot more threads than I would have liked. All of them suffered from that same problem.
Got it. No, that makes total sense.
I still think that there is merit in reading a story where you learn about a time period and how that time period was viewed through the lens of a particular race. But other than that, like, I actually think this might be the weakest of her stories, and I am sad about that because I was really, really excited for it. In the end, like, it wrapped up too quickly. It felt a little too messy in the execution, and unfortunately I didn't love it as much as the others. The other three that I'm going to talk about right now I read digitally. So first is The Duchess Deal by Tessa Dare. This book is another historical rom-com. Tessa Dare is also very good at that, and she injects her historical romances with a bit of modern sensibilities, so that's always fun. This one in particular is about a main character, Emma, who goes off to a duke to have him repay her for a wedding dress for his former fiance that was never claimed and she never got paid for. And instead, she gets an offer from the same duke asking her to be his wife instead of just, you know, paying for the dress, and like he promises to take care of her and like it'll solve all her like money problems. And so, because this is a rom-com, she ends up saying yes. It is this interesting dynamic where they're both trying to make the best of this scenario, and at the same time they're starting to learn about each other and find more to respect and like in each other. Watching that romance blossom was really fun. I still enjoyed the humor in the story. The side characters were also really great, and I also genuinely liked that it was just like a wholesome romance that made me laugh a lot. I also read another Tessa Dare book, and that book was Romancing the Duke. And this one I really loved. So the main character's name is Izzy Goodnight, and she is the daughter of this very prolific author who has written like an ongoing series starring a character named Izzy Goodnight. He actually ended it on a cliffhanger unexpectedly because he died. Oh. So Izzy is also kind of down on her luck until she gets this letter that tells her that she has been left a castle in someone's will. She ends up going to the castle only to discover that the actual owner and previous inhabitant of the castle is in the castle still. She at first wants to get him out and he wants to get her out, but then they end up working together in order to figure out how in the world it happened that she suddenly got this letter and owns the castle. In the course of them working together, sparks start to fly because they start to realize things they like about each other, and they start to let their walls down, and it's great. It was so much fun to read, honestly. It was kind of funny because it was the first time I'd ever seen like fandom sort of in a story, because one of the things that really made me laugh about this novel, this is a whole tangent that has nothing to do with like all of my other feelings about this book, but there's like groups of people who cosplay as the characters in the Izzy Goodnight story, and they play a role in the book, and I was not expecting this at all. So my brain was like, what?
You gotta respect that.
It was
You gotta
so
respect that writing though.
fun.
You gotta respect that.
Oh my gosh, it was so hilarious. And I just like, I was dying because I'm like, this is historical fiction. And all of a sudden you have these people like dressed up as knights and as ladies in waiting, and I'm like, you know what? I'll go for
Take it. Take it.
It's also really fun to watch the romance develop between these two people who are so afraid of being vulnerable and who are trying to protect a variety of legacies. The hero is also actually partially blind in the story, which adds an interesting element to it that I did not anticipate loving as much as I did, but I did. So I definitely really enjoyed Romancing the Duke, and of the two Tessa Dare books, I think that one is the one I enjoyed just a little bit more and would recommend. The last thing I read digitally is a book called The Princess Plan by Julia London. Now here's a fun fact about me. I don't actually read a lot of like romance books where it's like royalty centered, where it's like a prince or a king. Those aren't necessarily my thing. But the reason why I wanted to read The Princess Plan is because there's actually a murder mystery in it. The king of a foreign kingdom, his attendant is murdered early on, and so our main character gets involved in trying to solve the mystery of who done it, basically, and ends up, you know, teaming up with the prince and like sparks fly. It was really cute. I thought it was pretty fun. I generally like murder mysteries on the lighter side. Less gore, better for me. That was really entertaining and really fun. I did feel like it wasn't quite as effective at hooking me right away and like reeling me in so that I kept wanting to read it. Like I would constantly be pausing and be like, oh, I can pick that up later. So in that case, it wasn't necessarily like a must read for me. It was very enjoyable for what it was. I especially enjoyed the secondary characters in it because they were just a riot. And I'm pretty sure the next 2 or 3 books in the series must be about them. Like there's no way it couldn't be. So I'm very interested in seeing how those stories turn out. In terms of if it was a romance that I genuinely appreciated, I did. I really liked the relationship between the main couple, and I did enjoy watching it unfold and seeing this mystery get solved. It's not necessarily my new favorite like romance book ever, and I wouldn't also say that this author is immediately gonna make it onto my favorites list, but it was good enough for me to like enjoy, so much so that I would read the next book in the series. That's all I gotta say about that. I'm gonna turn it over to Macky now.
I went sort of on a comics binge because for those of you who've been paying attention, I have recently been subscribed to Kindle Unlimited, and of course Prime Video has its own, like Prime also has its own sort of like graphic novel set, so it's just been one graphic novel after the other for me, and for the first time in my ever bookish life, I'm ahead of my reading challenge.
Wow,
because,
that's amazing.
Yeah, but only because like they're graphic novels. Like that's like where we gotta. But still, we're gonna start part 1 of my binge with the following sort of. I want to see more adult graphic novels. Let's start with Bloodshot. Technically, the entire thing is on Kindle Unlimited so far. Will I be broken up if I'm not able to read absolutely all of them before they, you know,
go away?
No, because Bloodshot, it's a great concept, right? So you've got this practically unkillable dude. He's made practically of nanites, so you can blow him the frag up, and he just sort of nanites back up to life. And the kicker here is that the government agency that sort of runs him has implanted several false memories that they sort of ply whenever he has to go on a mission. Where in false memory set A, a war buddy of his gets captured, and he has to rescue that guy, when in fact he's extracting some random target or whatever. Or somebody killed his other war buddy in random memory set B. So that's basically it. And then he breaks away from that programming, and then he's like...
So it's like Dollhouse, but not.
Dollhouse is infinitely more interesting plot and character-wise. The thing with Bloodshot is there's only so much you can do with that kind of character while trying to extend it. I think that's the problem that Bloodshot sort of fell into, is that they're trying to serialize it, make it go on and on and on.
Maybe it would have worked better, Stan.
It would have worked better if there was like a, I just need to get my life back on track, and then it sort of ends there. That's not what they did. Yeah. And there's like 10 graphic novels. And here's the thing, it's a hit, right? Like it's a huge hit. I feel like I was walking into it with like expectations of it being sort of a little bit more than what it actually was. And if it's just an action romp, science fiction action, sort of like bloody, gory kind of romp, all right, fine. Shut your brain off. It's like Fast and the Furious, but with nanites and guns. I don't know. It's a terrible way to describe it. Clearly, I'm not into the genre. Moving slightly up in terms of like, did I enjoy it a little bit more, would have to be Superior Carnage. Now, back in the day of Sega Genesis, anybody played Sega Genesis? I never read comics back in the day because I couldn't afford them, because there were other more important things to buy, like, you know, food. I love food. I want to buy food over comics. A video game called Maximum Carnage came out, where the stars of the Maximum Carnage are Venom and Spider-Man, because Venom, for whatever reason, spun off a different symbiote. For those of you who don't know who Venom is, he's like an alien creature, the merge to a human, and they are Venom. It's a very we collective kind of deal. And created the symbiote Carnage. Carnage is basically like all red and murderous, and he partnered with, you know, like if Eddie Brock, partner like the symbiote that Venom sort of attached to, was a journalist, this guy was a serial killer. And it's exactly that. It gets really, really, like, it's called Maximum Carnage because
I'm out.
It was horribly violent, and terrible, terrible, terrible things happen. A bunch of the local Marvel heroes have to get together to make this work, right? In this particular piece and timeline in the Spider-Verse universe, Peter Parker is now being inhabited by Dr. Octopus's brain, and he is now known as the superior Spider-Man because Doc Ock thinks he's always superior to Peter in every way, form, or fashion. That's its own thing, and very weird. Just in my head, I'm like, I just want to know what happened to Carnage this time, man. There were some dudes that were trying to free Carnage. One of them had the power to sort of control minds. And he wanted to control Carnage as his, like, weapon. That did not go well. Obviously, Superior Spider-Man wins the day. It's nice if you know Carnage, but for those of you who are sitting there with like a tree full of owls, just what is this guy talking about? Yeah, me too. That's how hard it is to get into. Like, you pick Superior Carnage up and you have no idea what the hell's going on. You're even like, why is Dr. Octopus here? And why is he in Peter Parker's body? I didn't even bother. Like, that's the Marvel Universe for you. There's so many nested stories.
Who needs to know, really?
I just wanted to know what happened to Carnage, and it was crazy. Moving on to the Witcher comics, and that was pretty cool. The books, and I want to say the graphic novels and the games sort of really mesh together well, I want to say, because they sort of happen in different timelines that you could, regardless of whether they were alternate universes or not, you could string them all together chronologically and go, oh yeah, this all made sense. So for the Netflix series to sort of tie in all of that a little bit is really, really great. So volumes 1 to 4, I bought these sort of like ages ago, I want to say. Finally got around to reading them, and they are really, really good. For anyone who are a fan of the Witcher series, you're going to want to like read all of them. I don't even have to tell you anything about them, just read them. Read them, it's awesome.
Just about Geralt.
Yeah.
That's it.
For those of you who don't know, The Witcher is set in well, you never know. I didn't know what The Witcher was until my brother was like, dude, you gotta watch The Witcher. And I'm like, what is that?
No, I didn't know about it until you started playing the game.
Exactly. The Witcher is set in sort of like a medieval kind of world where there are monsters every bloody where. Like, that's just how it is. Like, there's just monsters everywhere. Sure, there's some elves in there too.
Grimdark.
But it's very, thank you. It's in the grimdark genre, so it's very, very sort of like bloody and terrible, and there are no happy endings. And The Witcher actually capitalizes on traditional fairy tale type stories, but they twist it all further, and basically there are no happy endings in this one. Witchers in this world are mercenaries who are hired to kill monsters. They are genetically modified from childhood, mutated on purpose. Most kids don't even survive that process, and those who do become the Witchers. They're basically the demon hunters and demon slayers of this world. It centers around Geralt of Rivia, who is the the Witcher of the hour, and his shenanigans and how he sort of breaks the mold of what Witchers sort of are expected to do and is. So great companion to the series. Go grab him if you're a Witcher fan. Which leads me up to The Wicked and the Divine Omnibus number 4.
Which is the ending, right?
Which is the end of the entire Wicked and Divine series. Gods are reborn every 90 years, I want to say, in the bodies of teenagers. They are worshipped for 2 years after they awaken, and then they die. And the cycle has been perpetuating for years. And this tells the story of how this most recent iteration of gods, Baal, Sekhmet, Inanna, Lucifer, Persephone, break that trend and break that cycle, and what does that mean for them? Things don't happen as planned. Kieran Gillen is a genius. I love what he's done with this thing. It took me a little bit of a while to get the lore down, because they finally reveal, they peel back the layer, and what is the lore behind all of this stuff? And I'm like, wow, that is hard to follow. But then again, I was like devouring it with the urgency of somebody who is like incredibly hungry, and there's a burger like in the front of him. It's like, I don't care, I'll just eat it. I don't, just give me what happens next? That was the thing. So maybe I'll reread it just so I can understand the lore, because that's not what I want to know right away. I want to know, well, what happens to our guys now that they know what the hell is going on.
That's fair.
I don't know what the hell is going on, but they do. I want to see what they do with it. So I'm a terrible reader. I skip and I skim. And has that done any good for my writing? No. But
the bitterness.
But am I happy about like what I've read so far? Yes. So please pick up The Wicked and the Divine if you can. There are 4 omnibuses out there, and they're totally worth the binge. They really are. Like, it's fun to just one day, okay, what the hell just happened?
So now I'm gonna go to a more like cheerful mode, because we're gonna go back to my historical romance reading, and I'm gonna be talking about 5 books that belong to the same series. and those are Bridgerton books. Kristen, if you're watching this, I'm about to frickin' spoil who is in each of these books. We are gonna talk first about the third book in the series, An Offer from a Gentleman, which features Benedict Bridgerton. And my favorite thing about this book is that it is basically like a Cinderella retelling. I really enjoyed the main couple in this book a lot more than I remembered it. It's actually one of the ones I reread the least, so I actually didn't remember a lot of the specifics. I remembered the ending, and I remembered a particular moment that the main couple shares, but other than that, like all the other details were like way like buried in the back of my mind. It was so fun to feel like I was experiencing the story for the first time again, and because it has that fairy tale vibe, the entire story feels extra magical, as someone who loves fairy tales, that is.
Sure.
So this is actually one of my top books in the Bridgerton series. The next book is the fourth book, which is still my #1 book in the series, and that's Romancing Mr. Bridgerton by Julia Quinn. This book is about Colin Bridgerton and the person he falls in love with. My favorite thing about this book is that it is the story of a girl who falls for her best friend's older brother, which is one of my favorite romance tropes when it's done well. It's one of the stories that takes place in the least amount of time, and it also is pretty much just centered in London. I really enjoyed it. I think it's so delightful just to watch these two like have their banter and then realize that they're sort of seeing each, well, at least in Colin's case, he's sort of seeing things in a new light, and I'm a sucker for that trope, and I think Julia Quinn does it so well in this book, and I still love Colin and Penelope so dang much. Still my favorite in the series. And then you have book 5, which is To Sir Philip with Love, which I only remembered bits and pieces of, but enough so that when I read it, it felt sort of like coming back to it. It's about Eloise Bridgerton, and she literally runs off from London in order to meet this guy who proposes that they see if they'll suit each other for marriage. This person happens to be the widower of her far cousin, and they've been corresponding for quite some time through letters and getting to know each other that way. And so when they meet in person, it doesn't quite turn out the way either of them expected, because they had an impression of each other through the written word that didn't necessarily translate in person, because they're very different personalities.
Yeah.
And along with this widower, he actually has 2 children. They're twins. And it's actually a really cute and charming story. It's a lot heavier than I remembered it being, because I had forgotten the reason why this widower had lost his wife in the first place. It actually plays out pretty well. Again, it takes place in a very short time frame, which is always like, now having read a lot of other romances, I'm like, a little bit like, okay, that's a little too short for my liking, but it was still pretty charming. And then we have the 6th book, which is When He Was Wicked, which is about Francesca Bridgerton. This is actually probably my least favorite book in this series, I want to say. Francesca was happily married to a man named John, but he died one day of a aneurysm, I want to say. I mean, that's not what they call it in the book, because I don't think that was the thing in the book at the time, but he basically dies of some medical condition that comes on him one day. And after losing him, his cousin Michael, who is one of this couple's best friends, has to step up and take over like the earldom. The problem with that is that it puts him in Francesca's path for, and this cousin Michael has always had feelings for Francesca, like even before Francesca and his cousin John got married. And so their relationship is like this complicated thing where they're constantly trying to overcome their grief over losing this beloved cousin, this beloved husband, but also trying to figure out their relationship between one another, because they used to be friends, but then now it's getting complicated because he still has feelings for her and she's starting to develop like an attachment to him. It's this thing. It's not necessarily my favorite kind of story to read about. I also just felt like Michael's actions sometimes made me want to wring his neck because he was being extra annoying. And so was Francesca, mind you. I don't know, like there's just something about this particular Bridgerton story that doesn't really work for me, and it's never worked for me. This is only the 2nd time I've read this story. Still don't love it that much. It was fun to see all the other Bridgertons in it, which I will always appreciate in any of these books. But as for the actual story between Francesca and Michael, I was just like, take it or leave it, honestly. So this is probably my least favorite. Good thing it's like a later book in the series. However, the 7th book totally made up for it. It's In His Kiss is about Hyacinth Bridgerton, and I love her love story. It's like so fun. She's kind of a firecracker. She's kind of like the most outgoing of the siblings at this point. She's the youngest. She visits this older dowager countess every week to read her a book, like, because she's a little elderly and old, and she's kind of like this dowager countess who's kind of like opinionated, doesn't really give a
fig.
I'm trying to think of a good, doesn't really give a fig about anyone's opinions and will pretty much just state them for the public record. And the younger character, Hyacinth, is a lot like that. And so
Nice.
she ends up crossing paths with the Dowager Countess's grandson, and they end up having to team up because he has a diary that's written in Italian from his, like, it's like a family heirloom. And she actually can read Italian and sort of translate it. So they have to team up so that she can tell him a little bit about, like, what's, you know,
What has
going on.
transpired?
And of course, in the course of this investigation and translation,
that's where
they
it
develop
happens.
feelings, even though they both adamantly insist that they don't like each other because they're both headstrong and they both are, like, very opinionated. It's just so fun to watch the shenanigans.
That's 100%.
However, I will say, there is one thing that happens in this book, and that it's the intention of the guy character, Gareth. I did not like that. I had totally forgotten that was a part of the plot, and I was just like, this is not cool, dude. This is, like, in any century, in any situation, not cool. So that part, I will definitely 100% be like, it was very uncomfortable for me to read.
Yeah.
And if you want to know what it is, I will probably just include it when I post my review on Goodreads. However, outside of that, everything else about this novel was really fun and funny and charming to read. I still liked it a lot, with the exception of that one detail that I had totally, for some reason, forgotten. I would still say it's one of my higher ranked Bridgerton books. Alright, enough of me talking about the Bridgerton clan. That was a lot of Bridgerton talking. Anyway, as you can tell, I'm almost done with my reread. Just one more book to go and I will be finished. Those are all the books that we're going to be reviewing for today's What We Read. We hope you enjoyed this video. If you've read any of these books or comics, give us a holler. We will see you guys with another video next week. Bye!